Everyone, Matt here from Doctor and today we're going to do a full video review of the On Cloudboom Echo 3. So I'm very excited to finally get my hands on a pair of these. I've wanted to test them out for a long time. I have mentioned this on the podcast. I have been checking eBay and watching On's website for over a year. Google would like to let me know that I have checked it a billion times. And it's finally here. I was really excited to get my hands on a pair. On was nice enough to send me one and David one. David is holding off on review because he's about ready to race, so nothing new at the moment. I have 25 miles on my pair of very hard running, a ton of workouts, so I wanted to share my thoughts as soon as possible. And yes, it is On's first true super shoe. They had the On Cloudboom Echo, which we reviewed some time ago, which was very expensive, $270, didn't have a super foam, I wasn't even full carbon fiber plate, I think. Someone don't quote me on that. This one changes that. So you've got a similar upper to the last version, some mild changes that we'll talk about, but 2 full layers of Pebax foam and a full-length carbon fiber plate, coming in a little bit lighter than the last one. And is it a super shoe? Well, yeah, that qualifies it. It is fast. It is not quite the marathon shoe, I think, for most people, but it's still a very, very fast ride, and it should be because it costs $289.99. So $290, which I think is the most expensive super shoe out there to my knowledge. I think there's a version of the Alphafly that costs a little bit more than that, but that's not really a racer. It's the Alphafly Next Percent Nature, which don't get me started on that. This is, I think, of the legit super shoes, the most expensive one. So is it worth $290? Let's talk about that. So first, getting into specs, again, this is a super racing shoe based on some of the qualities that we talked about. I don't have all the specs. There's going to be some guesstimation here, but what we do have is it's 217 grams or 7.6 ounces in men's size 9. That is very similar weight to the Hoka Rocket X2, which when I looked at my size 10 pairs and weighed them, this one weighs 8.1 ounces, which is the exact same weight as my Hoka Rocket X2, which midsole feels very similar. We'll talk about that in just a second. I do not have stack heights. I do have a heel drop, which is 10 millimeters, although it feels a little bit lower than that. I would guess, don't eat me alive for guessing on this, we don't have these official, I would put this probably at 38 to 40 millimeters in the heel and 28 to 30 in the forefoot. There's a good amount of foam underfoot, and it does feel fairly high off the ground. I've compared it using some calipers in the rear foot here. I haven't figured out how to do it in the forefoot, but it's fairly similar to the Nike Vaporfly and a lot of those higher stack super shoes. So again, very tall stack height. Don't quote me on that, as I said, but definitely got the stack height, the foam, and the plate. Let's go into the fit first, because that's where things are somewhat similar to the last version, in that it does feel slightly long. I can't tell if that's because there's a little bit more width in the upper, or if you just got a little bit more width. I've got a little over a full thumb's width between my toes and the end of the shoe. It does feel a little bit long when I am warming up in it. As soon as I start doing a workout, I totally forget about it. So the upper is very nice. It's very breathable. It's got a good amount of volume. So people that have higher volume feet, you actually might do really, really well in this shoe. There's some flexibility. It's got some stretch, so I can actually wiggle my toes, which I think for a longer race would be really nice to not feel like you're getting constricted by the upper. It was a little bit hard to get a lockdown, I think, because it just fits a little bit long and a little higher volume. So I was struggling with that in the midfoot initially, trying to get the laces to really tighten down, and it wouldn't tighten down that much. Fortunately, the tongue is gusseted, so it stays in place, which is really nice. But then I figured out there's some extra lace holes here that I started using, and that locked it down really nicely. I haven't had any heel slippage, despite the little bit extra volume and longer fit. And despite the flexibility back here. So there is a small heel counter back here. It's thin. It's got some stiffness. It didn't bug me. There's a little padding, but I didn't get any heel slippage like the last version. I didn't have to lace lock it thanks to being able to work with this. So more secure upper than last time, but still very breathable, very light, and a little extra room and volume if you need it. So I think for people that want a firm riding super shoe, and you're like, hey, I need just a little extra wiggle room, this is probably going to give that to you while being super light. So uppers, good. Again, my only issue is a slightly longer fit, but it hasn't bothered me too much except with warming up. The sole, again, is where it gets interesting, kind of, but it's really classic for On. So I shouldn't have been surprised at all. So despite 2 layers of Pebax foam, it does ride a little bit firmer. And I've got 25 miles on my pair, and it took about 10 to 15 for this to break in. When I first put it on, I was like, this is firm. And I wasn't expecting that. And it felt really good. I was like warming up, I was like, okay, I'm not really impressed with this. But when I started picking up the pace, that's where it really started to shine. The faster you go, this thing responds really well. I like firmer shoes, to be honest with you. The firmer Pebax is good. Again, I know I referenced the weight with the Hoka Rocket X2. This ride reminds me a lot of that. Once it broke in, the heel does have some nice firmer bounce to it. It's got some midsole compression. It starts to soften up a little bit at that time, but it's not a soft ride. It's still a firmer on ride without being as aggressive as some of the other stuff. Not aggressive, but as firm as some of their other shoes. It's got bounce. If you hit the heel, it's really good and transitions very quickly. Forefoot is much firmer, I think, from how stiff the plate is. There is no flexibility in this shoe. It's very rigid, very stiff. Again, fast you go, it seems to transition really well. My favorite thing for using this for has been faster fartleks. So I've done some 1 minute reps, some 3 minute reps, and I was able to move really quick. Probably the fastest I've run in quite some time. Is that because I'm also getting in shape? Finally, yes, but it can move really fast. And I think the faster you go, the fastest thing is going to do and work better for you. So I'm really excited for David to get some workouts on these. But again, he's got to wait a little bit. But for someone like me, I'm probably going to max out at like a half marathon for this. The reason why is I would definitely use this for 5K, 10K. It moves very quick. And the snappy ride keeps it moving very quick underfoot. It's not stable. The sole is narrow for how tall the stack height is. There are no sidewalls or any additional security. I didn't get any slippage, nice, which goes back to the upper with turns, which I do quite a bit of, but it's not overly stable. The stiffness helps somewhat, but it's not a stable shoe. So people that need that for longer efforts, you're not going to have that. So that's part of what limits me for using it for a longer effort, but also it being a little firmer. Just like the Hoka Rocket X, I would keep this for up to the half marathon unless you're an elite runner or unless you have very stable mechanics. And it's not unstable, but unless you want something firmer over the marathon distance. The most fun thing I did with this was I was doing some downhill repeats and hitting like 4:30 pace. These felt great. So again, moving quick, they're really, really good. I'm really curious to see, On has another super shoe out there that hasn't been released called the On Cloud Tri. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on that. That looks to be more similar to something like an Alpha Fly, where it's going to be more of a marathon or longer distance shoe and hopefully is a little softer, but knowing On, it's probably still firm. But yeah, it's a snappy Pebax foam. It's not going to be as soft as your Vaporfly or your Endorphin Elite or Endorphin Pro or even your Adios Pro 3. It's firmer and a lot snappier. So shorter stuff works really well, up to marathon probably for me, but it's still really, really nice. It's a fun shoe to get miles on, despite the slightly longer fit that I mentioned, and it's a true super shoe, so it's great. Is it worth $290? I'm gonna say no. I would probably put this more around $240, $250. $290 is a very tall order for this shoe when there's other stuff that's a little bit softer and a little bit more accessible for a lot of people. But I think if you have the money and you like a little firmer ride, you want a little bit more volume and maybe a little bit more length in the upper, I think this shoe might work really, really well for you. For most of us, probably wouldn't spend that just because I think there's some better options that are a little bit cheaper, but I am still happy that On finally used a Pebax foam and has a serious marathon racer out there. Again, I would put it more as not a marathon racer, but a super shoe out there. I am excited to see the On Cloud Tri, which I think will be that marathon type shoe for them. But this one, again, I would put it more at half marathon. I'm still liking it. I'm still going to get a ton of miles out of this. I do have 25 miles, and I'm a little concerned about the accelerated wear I'm seeing here, and I'm worried I'm going to pull this piece off. But I'll keep getting miles, and I'll keep updating you, and you'll see that we'll have a full written review soon. But that's the full review of this shoe, the On Cloudboom Echo 3. Is it a decent shoe? Yes. Is it worth the price? I think it's a little overpriced, but it's snappy. It's fun. I'm enjoying it. And I'll keep all of you updated to see what happens and get some more miles out of these.